Welcome to the Wildflowers Embroidery tutorial, a beginner-friendly design that teaches you versatile stitches that you can use on your clothes, tote bags, napkins and more. In your embroidery kit, you would have received everything you need to complete this pattern. Pastel shades of embroidery floss, a thread cutter, the needle and the wooden hoop. You would have also received the pre-printed cotton fabric that we will be using to learn this design. To begin with, let's learn how to mount an embroidery hoop. Once you place the design at the center of the inner ring, you can simply push the upper ring over the fabric, which is kept over the inner ring. Make sure that the printed design is in the center and tighten the screw of the hoop. Now you can pull the fabric from the outside and even tighten the screw of the hoop to make sure that it is taut. To do this, the fabric must sound like a drum when you tap on it. Now that your hoop is ready, let's thread the needle. We will start with the flowers. Take the pastel pink floss and cut a piece about 45 to 50 centimeter long. The floss has 6 strands, but we'll be using only 3. Embroidery usually uses 3 or 4 strands and sometimes even fewer, but for this design we'll stick with just 3. Carefully divide the 6 strands into 2 groups. When splitting the floss, pull it apart really slowly into 2 equal parts. Make sure to do this really slowly so that it doesn't create any knots. Now thread the needle and tie a knot at one end. The longer end will have the knot and the shorter thread will be free with no knots. To begin with, we will start with the satin stitch, which is simply filling the entire design with straight line stitches. For the flower, we will start from the center of each petal. Bring the needle up from the bottom of the petal and push the needle down across the petal directly opposite where you started, creating a long smooth stitch. Remember that your stitches are straight and parallel to the lines of the petal. Now bring the needle back up close to the first stitch and repeat the process. Each new stitch should be placed right next to the last one. Continue stitching this way, covering the entire area of the flower, making sure your stitches are smooth and even for a neat satin-like finish. Watch the video to understand the direction of each stitch. Now we move to the next petal. As you can see, we are stitching them section by section, petal by petal. This way you will be able to stick to the outline and your stitches will take shape of the flower. Stitch along with me and pause the video if you need more time to catch up. When you are done with a thread, either because you finished stitching or the thread is too short with about 2 inches left, you need to secure it at the back. To do this, bring the needle to the back of the fabric and pass it under a few nearby stitches to anchor it. Then make a small knot or two by looping the thread under the stitch and pulling it tight. Once secured, snip off any remaining excess thread close to the knot and you are done. Now we'll move on to the next part. The video will speed up during any repetitive sections. Please pause the video as needed to catch up. The bottom of the flowers will be covered with the French knots. with a bluish grey embroidery floss. Follow the same steps as we did last time. Cut the embroidery floss, split the strands, thread the needle and tie a knot or two at the longer end. This is a complicated stitch, so make sure you watch the video a few times before you try it out yourself. To make a French knot, bring the needle up through the fabric. Now hold the needle with the hand you're using to embroider and hold the thread with the other hand, that is a thread that is close to the fabric. Now wrap the thread around the needle twice. Make sure it is tight. And now insert the needle back near the starting point while holding the thread taut. Pull the needle through gently to form a small tight knot on the fabric surface. If your knot is loose, it's mostly because you're not keeping the thread taut on the needle. You have to make sure that you wrap and hold the thread tightly as you stitch. Watch me make a few French knots before you try it out yourself. Once you get a hang of it, go ahead and finish the entire area with French knots. Make sure to stitch within the outline of the flower. Now fill the entire space with French knots, but make sure that your stitches are taking shape of the pattern. Once you are done, tie knots at the back to secure the stitches and snip off any extra thread. Now that the French knots are done, we will move to an easier stitch, the stem stitch. To do a stem stitch, bring the needle up through the fabric on the stem but a little away from the flower, and make your first stitch by going down through the fabric, just touching the flower. Now make the next stitch a little away from the first stitch and bring it down in between the 2 points of the first stitch. Repeat this process. Every stitch ends between the previous stitch. Watch the video carefully to understand how I stitch between the previous stitches. Repeat this till you finish the stem. Make sure you stitch on the pattern, hiding the printed design with every stitch. Once you are done, you can move to the fishbone stitch for the leaves. To make the fishbone stitch, begin by stitching a straight stitch from the tip of the leaf to the center of the leaf. Then start stitching alternate diagonal stitches from one side on the leaf pattern next to the previous stitch to the opposite side of the same stitch, like you see here. Now do the same thing from the opposite side. Continue alternating stitches from the center, moving downward in small steps. Each time, bring the needle up next to the previous stitch on the leaf outline and bring it down on the opposite side, but a little lower from the previous stitch. You will notice that the stitches overlap slightly in the middle, forming the fishbone effect. Keep going all the way from one side to the other, but making sure that the stitches are starting on the side of the leaf. Make sure to stick to the alternate diagonal stitches. As you come to the end of the leaf, your stitches will become slightly shorter, but you can see that the leaf is coming to life. Now let's move on to the little twigs. Prepare the light brown embroidery floss just like you have done for the other colors previously, and let's begin. You can start stitching the center of the twig just like how you stitch the stem of the flower. That is, make a short stitch and start the new stitch a little away and end the stitch between the 2 points of the previous stitch. Repeat this process till you finish the center of the twig. Make sure to keep each stitch short so that the curves are smooth. Once you finish the curved line, which is the center of the twig or the stem of the twig, you can move to make those little small stitches of the twig. To do this, stitch from the tip of the line to the stem. This is the easiest stitch. All you have to do is follow the lines in the pattern and make straight stitches that meet at the stem of the twig. Now snip off any of the extra thread and you are done. With this, we have learned all the stitches that are required for this design. You can go ahead and complete the entire pattern with the satin stitch and French knots for the flowers, the stem stitch for the stem of the flowers and the twigs, and the fishbone stitch for the leaves, and the straight stitch for the short lines on the twigs. This is how your completed hoop will look. Now snip off any of the extra thread before we complete the last step. Remember that embroidery is a slow art, so take your time and complete the entire hoop. To close the hoop, you will need to take a really long thread. I usually eyeball it, but it should be around 120 to 150 centimeter of any of the embroidery floss. Make a tight knot at one end of the embroidery floss and then thread the needle, and from the top stitch all the way around the hoop with a really loose running stitch. You can stitch it one at a time or even stitch a few layers together like you see in this video. Make sure that the stitches are loose and also make sure the fabric is still hanging outside the hoop. If you make it too tight, the fabric will curl up. So make sure it is loose and come back to where you started. Now, turn the hoop over and hold the end of the thread and pull tight. Your fabric that is outside the hoop will curl up and close the hoop, making it secure. Now make a knot and secure it by stitching it to the fabric. Snip off the extra thread, and here's your pretty floral embroidery hoop. This is a result of your patience and hard work. I hope this embroidery experience gave you a chance to step back from your routine and create something beautiful from scratch. Now you can proudly display this piece of art anywhere in your home. Embroidery is a slow, mindful art, so keep practicing, and I'm sure it will help you relax as you craft lovely, delicate pieces.